What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Valley coming at you with another off-season outlook. We are on to the Houston Rockets, who are quite topical after they made the decision to hire Ime Udoka on a 4-year deal worth $7+ million annually. I think it starts under $7 million, but it's worth over $28 million, I believe. I brought on my good friend and peer. He covers the Houston Rockets for Red Nation Hoops. Subscribe to his Substack. Great podcast, great writer. Salman Ali. Follow him on Twitter at Salman Ali NBA. That's at SalmanAliNBA as the National Basketball Association. The most important question of this podcast, because we have a lot to get to, it is the most important one. Salman, how are you doing?
Okay, man. I'm doing okay. It's been a long week, but I think it's I think it's been worthwhile. I think it's been worthwhile.
It's been a big week for Rockets content too. And look, so I went on and I did retweet this and quote tweeted it. Go check out his podcast if you haven't already. Subscribe. What's that?
Did you quote tweet
it? Oh, you didn't bump my quote tweet? You're a terrible person.
I didn't see it. I didn't see that you quote tweeted it.
We talked about the Ime Udoka hire at length, and so we won't try and we spent like 35 minutes on just the hire, so I'm not going to rehash all of that here, but I have basically, we need to hit 3 levels of it. And the first one is, before we get to the off-court stuff, is were you surprised by not even just the decision, but how quickly it came together?
Yes. I thought, I mean, for a minute, it seemed like Nick Nurse was the leader in the clubhouse. Right now, I can't imagine that I was the only person who felt that way, or that Rockets fans were the only people that felt that way. Right? Like, I feel like on a national level, it really felt like there was some momentum towards Houston being the landing spot for Nurse, and then they just randomly, like, I don't want to say randomly, it turns out that Ime Udoka was the favorite the entire time, and nobody knew. That's just how it goes down. But I mean, it seems like early on in the process, the Rockets, Udoka interviewed really well. That's seems to be, all the reporting seems to indicate that he impressed Rafael Stone, he impressed Tillman Fertitta, impressed Patrick Fertitta. Really got along with the top guys, and it seemed like what the Rockets were looking for in this search was someone that would establish a culture of accountability that they really wanted with Stephen Salas. And, you know, it always becomes clear what the organization is looking for in their coach when the coach gets hired. It always becomes obvious after the fact. But I couldn't think of a more clear scenario of that than this.
The introductory press conference was not the least bit illuminating on his suspension with the Boston Celtics, where he was suspended and then eventually dismissed after going to the NBA Finals, mind you. And so you think it's serious enough for having an improper relationship with a subordinate staffer. Also, Woj, I think it's reported multiple times, but Woj did come out and report it once the Ime Udoka hire came through, that there were text messages and language used that was deemed too inappropriate, and I guess just decided, the organization thought that it was too far gone to bring him back or to have a reasonable reconciliation. I will start on this because I hate putting the onus on the guest when it's the sensitive topics like this. I found the quotes that came out of the intro presser to be mostly bullshit. I didn't like the way that he framed it as his overcoming adversity. I do believe in redemption. I do believe in atonement. He did say that he feels even more remorse now. I'm still just trying to grapple with these feelings of what was said specific, not that we needed the actual language, but what happened that the Celtics felt that they needed to get rid of someone who just coached them to the NBA Finals versus a team that came out and said, the word Woj used was, there was nothing that was disqualifying when it came to his candidacy. And there's just such a gap in the way this matter then was viewed. Is it simply because so much time passed? And the other 2 elements that are hard to grapple with is, it wasn't just him or even his family that was impacted by this, or even just the female staffer that was impacted by this. It was the Celtics organization's stable of female staffers, because of all the fuck shits who fancy themselves social media sleuths who went on and tried to identify who the female staffer was, resulted in all this sort of online harassment with even just photos being shared. If people weren't being tagged, it was absolutely grotesque. And then you have like if I'm a fan or if I'm a female staffer in the NBA, if I'm just a female who likes basketball, like this just all this shit rings hollow to me. And I don't actually know what the perfect response would have been. It wasn't Tillman Fertitta basically scolding anyone for saying, if you don't believe in second chances, shame on them. It's not that people don't believe in second chances. I just still feel that these big organizations don't get to come out and say, trust us, we did the due diligence, it's fine, we're moving forward. That's just not enough for me. And I don't know, I guess, what would have been enough, which then makes me a hypocrite. But framing this as the way Fertitta did to me felt a little dismissive. And then I'm just not a big fan of, spinning this as adversity for Udoka, which, okay, it is, but it was a bigger form of adversity for, the subordinate he has the relationship with, or even more so, the parties that weren't directly involved because these female staffers faced whatever harassment or just having their pictures and names out there on social media in the aftermath. And so that's where I landed on all this. And I'm just wondering how you're feeling now that the introductory presser is in the rear view.
Yeah, I guess the best way to talk about this is to discuss like how I was consuming everything, right? So when before Ime got the job, when Ime was talked about as a candidate for this job, I said, listen, if he's going to be the guy, you better damn well investigate what the hell happened, ensure that it's not going to happen again. Talk to Ime, talk to the Celtics, talk to the league office, do whatever you can to get as much information as you can, and then be ready to explain yourself, right? At the introductory press conference, because the question was going to get asked. So when Ime gets the job, I'm like, all right, listen, if you think he's the best guy and you did your due diligence, now you're gonna have to explain, right? And so we get all this reporting before the press conference about how the Rockets went to the league office and they were able to acquire the Boston Celtics report that they conducted through that third-party law firm. And Adam Silver basically gave every team that was interested in Ime the green light to pursue him. Like, we're not going to step in the way because we think from the information that we've gathered, that 1-year suspension was sufficient. So that comes out, whatever, right? I'm like, okay, you still got to explain it, man. Like, you still have to explain like why him versus everybody else. Why this isn't going to happen again. Is Ime remorseful? He hasn't spoken to the media since this all went down last year. This is the first time he had an appearance. So the press conference starts, as anyone could have predicted. It's the first question. And Ime answers it, I would say, as well as you could in his circumstances, right? Because we podcasted yesterday or the day before yesterday, and we talked about how, listen, you can't disclose everything that happened because this involves other people, right? So with that being said, with that in mind, I mean, he did a pretty decent job of like not getting defensive himself, not saying like, hey, trust me, like you don't know the situation. Like, he didn't do any of that. He basically took accountability upon himself. He took ownership of it. He talked about what he's done since then. Like, he took sensitivity training, got counseling. I didn't know that. That's new information.
Yeah, that was good to hear. And to just interject really quickly, my criticism is more directed at the organization and the way
we'll get there. We'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there. Well, and like, so Tillman, he has these prepared remarks, and I thought those prepared remarks were decent, right? Rafael talks about the due diligence that they did with the league office, and like, they were largely in the clear for the first 30 minutes. It's like the first 30 minutes of that press conference went about as smoothly as you can. That question that Tillman gets asked is the last question, and it felt like a blown layup because it's like, dude, you couldn't just land this plane. Like, all you had to do was just continue on with the tone that you guys were taking before. Instead, you take on this preachy tone about shame on you if you're not giving people second chances. It's like, dude, no, it's not about that. It's not about that. The question that was asked to you was, what do you have to say to people that feel like Ime doesn't deserve this job or are looking at the Rockets and criticizing them because they made this hire instead of some other hire? And all you had to do, and it's not about the Christian thing. It's not about bringing up a religion, because I'm getting blown up on Twitter about how like, oh, are you just upset about the Christian thing? No, you could there's actually a way to make a more coherent faith-based argument than you did, right? If you were to say the whole Christianity thing, you could have attacked it from a million different angles. Like,
right.
Hey, like I believe in forgiveness. Like I'm that's what my faith teaches me. I understand how people feel. I just know that we would not have compromised the women that work in this organization if we felt this wasn't the right hire. Like you could have made a faith-based argument, right? So even the tack that he took could have been taken better. It just felt like a blown layup. And it's unfortunate because I do believe for the 90% of the presser, I thought it was smooth. And then here's the thing. With something like this, if you fuck up that badly, that quote is going to make all the headlines from the presser. Nobody cares about that. Like, I guarantee you there are people listening to this podcast that didn't know that those first 30 minutes went smoothly. They just know about that quote because it was so god awful. I mean, it was beyond strange and like I don't know, like why it made no sense to say in that moment other than just frustration. He got frustrated and he said that. And it's like, no, dude, like you probably should never talk to the media again unless you're required to, because it's like you have to be, you're like, he's like a loose dog. Like he can't control himself. Like he even so the Rockets were building this brand new state-of-the-art $70 million practice facility in the Galleria area of Houston, which is like the really, really nice area, right? It's where all the players stay when they're coming down. I'm excited. I'm excited about it, by the way. But they're building this new state, and we had heard whispers of it, but it was mostly just rumors and speculation, and nobody really had concrete evidence that this was happening. And one could suspect that the reason that we weren't getting that is because that the Rockets wanted to report this themselves and make a real like a nice, easy, again, a layup of a positive news cycle for themselves. Tillman Fertitta gets asked about his spending habits with the team, and he gets so defensive that he's like, we're building a $70 million practice facility. It's like in his spiel of things, right? It's like, oh, we fly on 737s. It's like dude, like you don't, I don't know, man. Like, there's just no discipline in him. And I say that, and I this is going to be hard to believe. He's actually gotten better from where he was a few years ago, which tells you how bad he was before, right? Like I'm telling you, as someone who observed him before, every other answer was terrible, right? Every other answer is like, what is he saying? Has he ever spoken to people before, much less the media, to people? Has he ever had human interactions? Does he know how some of this stuff's going to come off? And it's like, I guess he just needs more seasoning, or I don't know what. I honestly, some of this is just ingrained, and
yeah,
I don't know. I think he handled that question about as poorly as you can. And again, Tillman himself was asked like 6 different variations of this question, and 5 of those variations he answered responsibly, right? And then the 6th one, it's like, dude, like I can't even check Twitter right now because we can talk about this if you want, but like I've become a Rockets fan this year again, right? I've become a full-on fan, and when I heard that quote, it's like the media part of my brain picked up. It's like, fuck, I know this is gonna go. I know this is the quote that's gonna stick out from this presser, and I'm so shameful to check Twitter right now for how that quote's coming off. Like I don't know how people are reacting. I just know how the media is, right? I just know that this is something, if I were if I were watching this press conference, this is something that I would pick up on, and I would tweet, and I would criticize the Rockets for, because it's terrible. Why would you say that? Why would it makes no sense.
I didn't look, and I saw some of the replies to your final tweet of the day, I believe, and I don't understand the people that are making this about anti-Christianity at this point. I do think
guess they didn't hear the quote. That's my guess.
Look, I didn't even hear the quote. Like it was one of those things where it's like I saw everything I wasn't around for the presser. I saw everything after the fact, but like to your point, because that quote came out, and I don't think it was presented based off how many different outlets like framed it. I don't think it was. I didn't see
No,
the presser. I don't think it was presented unfairly or out of context.
no.
But so many people ran with that.
It was terrible when it came out. It was everybody in that room groaned because it's like they all knew. Like these are all journalists. They know how the news works. Like they knew that's a terrible thing to say.
And the story led with that too, where it's the stuff about Udoka talking about how he went through sensitivity training, counseling with his son to better their relationship. I think some people would say, well, is he using that as deflection? But like that stuff was so far near the bottom of a lot of the stories. That quote hijacked the entire press conference, which look, when you compare it to the last one of these that we had with Chauncey Billups in Portland, this was going so well just relative to that. And I don't want to make it a competition because of the sensitivity of the topic. However, from a basketball perspective, and we did get into this a little bit, have you gained any insight either from that presser as to what to expect that Udoka brings to this team, or just thinking about it since the hire, what do you expect or going to watch for with how he handles this team, with the caveat that there is a pretty good chance it looks a lot different before next season?
Well, this is what sucks, right? It's because like I talked about how I've become a fan again, and I was listening to that press conference like enthralled. There was so much basketball stuff going on. Ime was talking about how he wants to tell the players like, listen, young isn't an excuse, right? Like to for any of the mistakes that you're going to make. Accountability is going to be my biggest priority here. It's like, okay, that's a solid, tangible thing that we learned at the press conference. We learned that he watched a lot of Rockets before the interview process, and Jabari Smith Jr. was a prospect that he really, really liked. Specifically, he pointed out specific names. Kevin Porter Jr. was a guy he got to watch at USC, right? Kevin Porter Jr. came in during the press conference, and there was like a little lighthearted moment there, and no one's gonna see it, right? He talked about the Rockets had $60 million in cap space, and that was one of the reasons that he wanted the job, right? That was the reason he chose the Rockets over some of the other openings that were available. Like the cap space was a big part of it, and that he wanted to go get shooters for this team. It's like, that's something I didn't know, right? There was so much we learned here, and I would love to talk about those other things, but I can't because Tillman said that,
Tillman said that. Reflections on this. I mean, I want to get into so bad. I want to talk to you about players more than just the offseason, but that is just that season look ahead stuff. And I hope that you will come back on for the Rocket season look ahead. But I wanted to talk to you about some of the players who would identify as core players right now and what you learned about them or just thinking about coming out of this season. And I think we should start with Jalen Smith. Comes off probably not the best. Jalen Smith. Jalen Green. I apologize. Okay. I'm getting Jabari and Jalen. Well, first of all, Jalen Smith's a real person too. But
yeah, I know.
Jabari, I'm combining names here. Jalen Green doesn't have the cleanest follow-up campaign to his rookie season. It feels like the dial is always turned to 11 out of 10 with him. What are just your thoughts coming out of his sophomore campaign? What are you thinking about with regards to him moving forward?
I'm not worried. It's not. I mean, you see this all the time in the NBA, right? Like it's not uncommon for a player to flatline their second season, right? Because how many times have we heard development is not linear? I think it's not unheard of that he would have a season where it was kind of a little bit down from the season before, right? I think it did kind of, I watching the preseason, watching Jalen Green in the preseason, I was like, oh, this guy might be much better than I projected him out to be. This guy might be he was playing like a superstar in the preseason, right? So it quickly squashed that for me, right? So I'm no longer thinking of Jalen like that anymore for the time being, but I think he did make some strides getting to the free throw line. That was a tangible stride. Even the nights where the threes weren't going in, he was getting to the line, which he wasn't last year. And I thought that was a big development for him.
His strength increasing, I think, was huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And just the passing was slightly better, right? It was a big surprise in the first place that he had an instinct to pass when he got into the lane, right? For me, it was because I watched him in the G League, he wasn't doing that. And so it got a little bit better in that he wasn't just passing when he got into the lane. Like, he was like looking to make the extra pass this year,
Mhm.
which I thought was encouraging. I thought, his floaters, which it's like a nice little like it's nice to see, some variation in the offensive set, right? And I thought more specifically, like him just reading his teammates, like Alperen Sengun, the chemistry he developed with him was very optimistic for me. Like I came away with that very enthused, and I want to see how that pairing works together next year with a real NBA head coach, right? Like, I think it's going to be really exciting to see how this roster gets unlocked under Ime. And, I think some things, some disappointments, the defense still worrisome. The shooting still not like, he's not like a guaranteed going to the season. He's going to be 36%. He's not there yet.
Mhm.
Right. I think once he gets there, we're talking about unlocking some really exciting stuff. The mid range shooting, obviously, that was already there. I think I think it was just more of a kind of more of the same for Jalen. To be honest, I thought this was a down year because of his shooting splits, but he improved in some areas, and I just want to see how he does next year with some more structure. And I think there's a real possibility that we look at what he does next season. It's like we look and we come back to this season. It's like this was such a wasted opportunity. That's how if you're going to ask me about the rest of the roster, by the way, it's going to be a consistent theme, like wasted opportunity. Like that's how I feel about the development of most of these young guys this year. It really was infuriating.
Because with Jalen Green, you look at, okay, the level of difficulty on some of his shots, I think that can explain a little bit of the efficiency dips, but then it's also, his catch and shoot numbers were down.
Yeah.
But you would just like to see him in a better, and then his finishing around the rim, despite getting to the line, that was dramatically down. But I'd like to see him with better spacing around him, more of an offensive steward next to him than a KPJ or any of the other guards that Houston ran out this year, really. And I think that could benefit him. I also think, giving more agency, and we did see it as the season went on, I think, to Alperen Sengun, who's your boy, and the next player I'm going to ask you about, that can go a long way too. And I was lower on him than you, and I still am. But coming into this season, he definitely exceeded my expectations. And there's just a very fluid, high IQ nature to his game. It's not just the passing. He can work and score from the post. He has the turnaround hook shot going. He has he can throw up some floaters or pushes. And so this is a guy who has a bunch of utility on the offensive end. What are your thoughts coming out of his sophomore campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed that he was still producing despite the constraints that were put on him. Honestly, and I realized that's like the biggest shill I could possibly say about him. But I mean, it really was like he starts the season on the bench because Bruno Fernando. I mean, you can't hold back the development.
As long as Alperen Sengun is in the NBA, like that anecdote is never going to die.
I mean, as long as Steven Silas is a head coach, it's never going to die. I mean, it was. Yeah, I mean, he starts the season on the bench, coming off the bench. He is playing consistently like 5 to 10 minutes per game less than the rest of the starters, and it's like it shows a real, lack of confidence in his abilities. Players get hurt. His usage rate stays exactly the same, exactly the same. The only thing that changes are like his minutes goes up, but like that's kind of shocking. Like the fact that Kevin Porter Jr. went down for a stretch and you're still giving Jalen Green. I mean, you're still giving Alperen Sengun here's your 15%, right? Like you're exactly where you were offensively before, and he produced. He still produced. I think what I liked from him a lot, especially this season, was his reading of his teammates. Like I think the chemistry developed with Jalen. We talked about that earlier, but it's not just Jalen. Like I think he developed chemistry with a lot of the guys in the roster, even when they didn't develop chemistry with him. Mm-hmm. And I'll explain what I'm talking about. I don't think Kevin Porter Jr. was always looking for Alperen Sengun. I still don't think, towards the end of the season, he was looking for him. But Sengun was always looking for Kevin Porter Jr., right? And I think that kind of stuff is so encouraging, right? Like the fact that you don't get discouraged by someone not passing the ball to you, but you're still going to give it back. You're still looking for the best opportunities for your teammates. I think that was good. But again, like I still can't go. I can't help but feel like this was a wasted opportunity for him. If anybody resonates with this theme more than anybody on the roster, it's him. I thought this was a guy that was going to average like 18 and 9 this year, right? Like I really did. I thought this was a guy that was going to clearly show himself to be the best offensive talent on this team. And he might be the best offensive talent on this team, but because he was playing like 5 minutes per game less than the rest of the roster, he can't prove it. He never had the opportunity to prove it. He never had the opportunity to prove his own head coach wrong, right? And I don't know, like he got better, which is surprising because he was so good that rookie year, but I don't think this was as good as he could have been. Like I really don't. I thought this was a real opportunity for him to show that the organization should have played him more last year. And because the organization continued to play him less, he couldn't prove that same theory wrong, which was made me really want to pull my hair out.
I'm interested to see if they can get just better spacing and cutters for him too. And I think that's why KPJ was someone that he linked up with or looked for, because that was someone who was like, can score in motion and would move without the ball.
KJ Martin was another one of those guys. Yeah.
Jabari Smith Jr. is the player on this roster right now that I remain highest on long term. I might be reading too much into a strong close to the season where we saw that he is more offensively than just this play finisher. Had some turnarounds going. He shot an incredible clip on pull-up jumpers over his final 20 games. During that span, actually, I was double-checking this before we went on. Over his final 20 games, out of everyone who attempted as many pull-up jumpers as Jabari Smith Jr., only Steph and Tyrese Maxey had higher effective field goal percentages. And so I think that is a good harbinger for the next iteration of the Rockets. But what are your thoughts, impressions coming out of his rookie campaign?
Like, okay, so I was lower on Jabari than I think a lot of people, right? I didn't have him number one. I had him number three.
I don't even think clearly the Magic didn't even have him. I don't know who had him. I guess a lot of people had him number one.
Most people had him at number one before.
That was still one of the wildest, just sort of fake outs leading into the draft, where it was, Jabari to Orlando. In the last 36 hours, it's it's Paolo.
Yeah, but even among the consensus media guys, like he was number one, and
yeah, you're right. There's so much distance between it, and Paolo was so good that I can't even fathom having him number one. But you're right.
Yeah, and like I remember like reading all that stuff, and I was like, am I not seeing something that everybody else is? Like, I just Paolo is so much better than him as someone who projects to be a star, right? Jabari could eventually become like a star, but it's going to require a lot more from where he's starting than where Paolo is starting and from where Chet's starting, right? And I thought this is somebody who is going to require a lot of player development from the ball handling standpoint. And in that respect, he actually did impress me. I thought this year he was a better ball handler than I remember watching at Auburn. Right. And perhaps that's because he got some more ball handling opportunity than he did at Auburn. But like it really was something that I was worried about this year. And that's not to say that he's not exactly Magic Johnson right now, right? He's not, right? He's someone that's still very raw on that end of the floor. He still has a lot of work to do as a shot creator. But as a defensive player, I see it, man. Like the tools are there, the motor is there, the rebounding is there, the blocks are there, the steals are there, the will to do it is there. It's just gonna take some structure. It's gonna take someone that is in his ear, telling him where he needs to be, when he needs to be there. Because sometimes he thinks he's exactly where he needs to be when he's not. Right, like he's a little overconfident in his defense right now, I'm noticing, and that's probably because he was such a highly touted defender as a prospect, right? And I'm kind of looking forward to Ime coming in and knocking him down a peg a little bit in a healthy way.
Probably going to be, you mentioned structure before. There's going to be way more structure to what Houston felt like. This is the way I framed it, and you watched more of them than I did. they felt like they had an ultra conservative approach without any aims, like out
Yeah,
any angles in that
yeah,
when
but
watching them on defense.
for some reason Jabari didn't have that same conservatism, right? Like he had a little bit more reign to do kind of what he wanted offensively. Like he got the ball a lot. Like he was given the opportunity to really score for the Rockets, and
Oh yeah,
perhaps
no,
we
I was
shouldn't
talking
be.
specifically about defense. They were completely
Oh,
ungoverned on the offensive end. Like they were completely just
yeah, well, most of them were right. Like, most of them were pretty. I wish all of them were uncovered, but most of them were. But getting back to Jabari, like, it's hard not to look at the 3-point shooting and be like, huh. Like I'm not saying it's a red flag yet, but it's definitely, huh. This is like you were like the highest, like one of the greatest 3-point shooting big prospects. That some of these these evaluators had ever seen,
mhm.
right? So it's not great when you come into the league and you're shooting less than 31% from three. I think it's something that that merits more monitoring next season. I think he needs to really shoot like he really needs to aim to shoot like 34-35% next year at the minimum, right? Like he was not a good shooter this year. And I think part of it was because I think, you mentioned the pull up threes. I actually feel like he took too many long threes. Like in Auburn, he loved shooting those above the arc threes, right? And if you looked up the distance on an NBA above the break three versus a college above the break three, the difference is like 5 feet. And I feel like the 3-point line was too far from it for him. And you notice his percentages went up pretty drastically when he stuck to the corners. And it's like that might be something that is worth being pointed out to him, right? Like if maybe you start your NBA career shooting more corner threes versus what you were comfortable shooting at Auburn. I know that's what you wanted to shoot when you got to the NBA, but this is clearly too far for you. And you see his percentages dip down as he takes a further step away from the basket. Like it's progressive in that way, right? And I feel like I think that's kind of an obvious, like he's not used to the 3-point line, the NBA 3-point line. And to some extent, we probably should have saw some of this coming because before his rookie year at Auburn, he was a mid-range shooter as a high school prospect. Like he was a knockdown, like drag out mid-range shooter, right? And he shot threes, but his specialty was as a mid-range shooter. Like he was like LaMarcus Aldridge,
Mhm.
and to see him kind of try, I mean, to see him expand into 3-point shooting in college was encouraging, but perhaps we shouldn't have had him shooting like 7 threes a game his rookie year. Perhaps it would have been better if he shot like 4 threes a game, and perhaps 3 of those should have came from the corners.
I would be with you to simplify his outside attempts. And a lot of the damage he did in the pull-up stuff that I'm citing, like that was happening inside the arc. And so like him getting more comfortable in that role, I do think is somewhat important. Though I think you can quibble, and you kind of alluded to this about his shot selection. Who is more to keep things moving important to this team long term? Tari Eason or Kevin Porter Jr.?
I guess it's just kind of a cop out. It depends on two things. It depends on what happens this offseason, and it depends on what happens. I guess it depends on what happens this offseason, and it depends basically on what the Rockets are able to get lucky with. Like if they get James Harden this offseason, then it's clearly Tari Eason. If they
Right.
get Fred VanVleet, I don't know. Or if they get someone like Mikal Bridges, I think it's the obvious answer is going to be KPJ is more valuable to you, right? It really depends on what the Rockets, if they get Scoot Henderson in the draft, like I think I'm tempted to say Tari Eason is more important to them long term, but KPJ is so far and away the better player right now. But that being said, Tari Eason was like their best rookie this year, and I don't think it was close. Like it was like
Wire to wire, no, not close.
yeah, and I predicted this before the season. Like let's pay attention to this, man. The guy is like 3 years older than Jabari Smith Jr. So there's an outside shot that he has a better rookie year. Let's keep an eye on that. And it happened, man. Like his rookie year really reminded me of Sengun's rookie year, and like the guy should have gotten like way more minutes, right? The guy should have been starting. Honestly, in all honesty, he should have been the starting power forward, right? But Jabari Smith Jr. being the number 3 overall pick, had seniority there. And I listen, he was really, really good offensively, and that's what was impressive. It's not. We knew what he was bringing defensively, right? We knew what he could potentially bring defensively, but it's the offense. It's the fact that he's finishing at the rim at the rate that he's finishing. It's the fact that he actually can drive into the rim over some of these trees, right? He can't go right yet, right? But he still has an avenue to get to the basket and finish there, which is impressive for a 21-year-old.
I will say, and I'm not a KPJ guy, he looked a lot more scalable offensively this year, sort of just plug and play. Like if you did get a Harden, or if you get another lead guard, or Scoot, or someone who's going to have the ball in their hands a ton, and if you're going to just up Sengun's license over the offense, in addition, while leaning on Green and then whoever you draft, I think KPJ is a much cleaner fit now than I would have said if you told me this,
he had
12 months ago or whatever.
Objectively, the best Rocket this year was Kevin Porter Jr. Objectively, he was.
And they need more guys. I mean, like when you talk about, they had in theory Garrison Matthews on the roster for most of the season. But like KPJ is like the guy that could score off motion away from the ball and keep defenses on tilt with his movement. They need more guys like that, no matter what they do. Are there any other players on this roster that you would like to, like, do you have like an ode to Usman Garuba that you would like to shower me with?
Man, KJ Martin, like that guy became a starter this year after demanding a trade this summer and getting laughed out the building. Like he demanded a trade this summer, and like, fuck is this guy? Well, he's demanding a trade, like the 2nd round pick. Like it makes no sense to anybody. And he as soon as Eric Gordon's traded, bam, the decision's easy. It's easy. Everybody knows it's KJ Martin because he had played that well up until that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he is so far and away outperforming where he was drafted relative to the rest of the Rockets. Like he was the 52nd pick in the 2019 draft, and he is playing like the 20th pick right now. I mean, at bare minimum, he is playing really, really above what most people expected. He wasn't even mocked in most people's top 60 in 2019 or 2020, excuse me. He wasn't mocked there. I looked, and that's why I was surprised. Like I had to do some last minute research before the draft. KJ Martin wasn't even on my radar because it's like the guy was like 80, 100 on some lists, right? And he is freak athlete. Potentially could become a good defender one day. His 3-point shooting, where did he shoot this year?
He was at 31+% around there.
Okay, but for his career, he's like 34, right?
Yeah, he's around there.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a really like tantalizing prospect there that you get, that they pulled out of thin air. They paid money for that draft pick. So that's the kind of stuff that helps you win trades down the line. That helps you put together packages. Like KJ Martin will never highlight a trade package, but he's the kind of guy that if you throw him in, could put you over the finish line.
That's a great point. And you talk about off-ball movement specifically, and that's someone that's like him and KPJ were like basically it. Who could at least do it effectively. And I think KJ Martin was at like almost 1.5 points per possession off cuts in the half court, which is just huge when you look at kind of the spacing he needed to navigate at points for the Rockets. This offseason is just, we talked about, they have like an easy pathway to $58+ million in cap space. There are so many things that could inform their direction. And so I want to start with this, is that whether you're looking at the draft or free agency, before we get into actual moves, players, how aggressive they'll be, you can pick one. What is the single biggest need that this organization, this roster has to make a focus to fill over the summer?
Playmaking.
Yeah, it was kind of easy, but
yeah, you need someone that's gonna get everybody involved. Even Jaylen, like I'm not sure if you got to read that reporting from Shams and Kelly Eco about how the Rockets, Jalen Green went to Rockets coaching staff and said, like, listen, I can't be having the ball in my hands as much as I do. Like that to me was like, that was meant to be like a throw in the reporting, like, hey, Steven Sauce has like no control of his coaching staff. They're coming to him and telling him what they want. And to me, I read that, I'm like, man, that's really mature, man. Like,
yeah, for someone in his second year who would, in theory, want,
yeah,
like that. Yeah, that's incredible.
yeah, and I'm like, yeah, you're right, and like it's gonna make it's gonna make building the team so much easier on the Rockets that they have that information in mind, that he wants to be off the ball, that he recognizes that's his best role. And I love Jalen Green. I think he can become an all-star one day. I think he's likely to become an all-star one day, excuse me. And I think if building around him, you're still gonna need someone to that can stir the drink here, right? That's gonna facilitate and get everybody involved. There's a possibility that there was a guy on the roster and they never gave that guy the opportunity. But the reality is the Rockets have to go into the offseason as if that guy is not on the roster. They have to. They have to, at every opportunity, they have to look for guys who can really dynamically shift their offense, right? So that's why James Harden's being mentioned. That's why Scoot Henderson would be awesome for the Rockets. That's why there are some Rockets fans that don't even want the number 1 overall pick. I think those Rockets fans are out of their mind, but it's happening, and I can see why they feel that way after watching this team.
I did not know there was a subset of Rockets fans that did not want Victor Wembanyama. We have to get into the Harden stuff. We talked about it at length. It's serious, but what's interesting is if they wind up with Scoot, do you think it makes it less likely that they would make a play for James Harden or even maybe another advantage creator? Or do you think that they're maybe so invested in making this big leap, it's just if James Harden is healthy and wants to come to Houston, like we're going to make that a focus?
So I'm not sure like what your draft philosophy is, right? Like when you're making these mock drafts, these big boards, right? I've just started doing this stuff like 2 years ago, right? But like the way I see it is you do tiers, right? You tier off your big board, and then within your tiers, you pick the guys that best fit your team, right? So like if 2 guys are in the same tier, you pick the guy that's a better fit for your team, right? So I think Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson are in the same tier. I have Scoot Henderson a hair better, right? Now, what's different about the Rockets is they can't do that because they have $60 million in cap space and their team might look drastically different. So they kind of have to draft with how their team looks and how it could look. They have to draft off intel. So I think when the Rockets get to the point where they're actually selecting, they have to kind of go off their intel and kind of make an educated guess, which is scary at the number 2 overall pick.
You're sort of saying like if you're number 2 and you see them go Brandon Miller, you're like, fuck, the James Harden noise is real.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Or I mean, who knows? Maybe the Rockets don't view it the way we do. Maybe they have Brandon Miller above Scoot Henderson, but I don't.
Yeah, true too.
Right? Like I don't. I have Henderson above. I still think most people are at the point where Henderson is above. Right? I think there are some, but those people are outliers. Right? Right? And not to say that that's like an incredulous thing to say. I think if I didn't think it was possible, I wouldn't have them in the same tier. But again, that's what's different about the Rockets. They have to go off of what they're hearing, what they feel, what they feel is likely. And at the end of the day, if they're not getting good intel, I would pick Scoot Henderson. I would just go with Scoot Henderson and figure it out later.
James Harden is in his, because I have overarching offseason questions about them still, but James Harden is sort of in his own tier of that. What do you make of, I think we both agree that it's serious. The James Harden to Houston noise is serious. You're from a Rockets perspective, if you were controlling this front office, is that someone that you would be this legitimately interested in? Not just as like his fit on the court or what he does to either elevate the players around, the youngsters around him, or increase the urgency behind your timeline,
the
but
money.
also just as an investment because he's older and what it's going to cost. I mean, his max salary can start at 46.9. I don't think he gets it, but if they, like, just where do you land on this issue? Because you both agree it's serious. I'm just curious whether you're pro doing it or you think it's a little bit. The word's not. I don't want to say stupid, but just a little haphazard.
My dad is one of those people that thinks it's a little haphazard, right? He is scared to death about giving James Harden that contract. And what I tell him whenever he brings this up with me is, who would you rather give the money to? Who would you rather give the money to? If you can credibly name somebody that is a better use of all that money that you're giving to James Harden, or name a few guys that are a better use of money. Like if it's not just one guy, let's just say there's one or two guys you're spending that money on. Is that collection of players better than a James Harden investment? I think the answer at this point is likely no. So yeah, I'm pro Harden, and I recognize it's an easy thing to say, because I am. I did watch the guy for like 10 years, and I am a fan of his, and like I think it's hard not to feel some sentimentality about it. But from an objective standpoint, you and I just agreed that the thing that they're most lacking is playmaking. James Harden's one of the best players on the best playmakers on the planet, and I think you look at what the Rockets need long term at the point guard position. I can't think of anybody I'd rather have other than maybe someone who's a little bit better defender and maybe a little bit younger. But you can't. This isn't a candy shop, right? Like Daryl Morey used to say this, right? It's like people think that superstars can just be had like at a store. You just go and it's like, I want that one, but I want like one that's like a little bit like I want that, but in yellow. It's like, no, you know, like you don't get that optionality, man. You have to kind of take them how they come and then figure out the rest of the roster around them to plug in holes. And that's kind of how I would do it.
The two things that concern me, and there's just no out, I could feel completely differently about the situation depending on what the contract looks like. If it's a 4-year max, he turns 34 in August, I'm going to have some issues with that decision. Even if you think there's no one they can spend the money on this year and that they're not going to have as much cap space moving forward as these players that they already have get more expensive. The other thing, though, James Harden's not coming to Houston alone, correct? You see a scenario in which he comes to Houston, they basically keep the roster intact, bring in this year's draft picks, plural, and go from there, where I know you would sort of introduce the notion of, well, maybe they'll give it 6 months or something. But I view it as if James Harden's coming to the Rockets, it'll be more of LeBron going back to Cleveland situation where that move is made almost instantly before the season starts.
It's either going to be LeBron Cleveland or LeBron LA, right? That's the way I view it. It's either going to be LeBron going back to Cleveland where everything happens right away, or LeBron LA.
That's important to say because either way, it means this roster is going to look a lot different by next year's trade deadline. If
that's an inevitability if you're getting Harden. It's an inevitability, right? I think you should approach it that way. If the Rockets are realistically trying to pursue Harden, they should be looking at this roster and thinking about who's expendable, right? Or thinking about who's the most expendable, because their chances are they're going to trade someone that's going to end up looking a lot better than they thought they were going to be, right? That's just how these things work. I'm sure you look at when Dan Gilbert traded Andrew Wiggins. I'm sure he didn't think that he'd become like a serious part of a championship team one day, right? Or at least he hoped he wouldn't, right? He was the number 1 overall pick. I can't say he never saw the possibility of that happening, but like I'm sure you're rooting against that possibility, but you have to accept it because guess what? You don't trade him. You don't win a championship in 2016. That's just how this works, right? You have to sacrifice long-term to gain short-term. And I think it's better for your franchise overall because if you're not trying to win the title, what the fuck are you doing this for? What is this all about? Why do you own a sports team? Right? I think about this all the time with the Phoenix Suns, right? Before they traded for Kevin Durant, right? Like when they were like cost cutting on the fringes, right? It's like, what are we doing? Like, are you guys trying to win this thing or not? Like, you're scared off by going to the luxury tax for Eric Gordon? Really? Like, is this not your goal or not? So I think if you're an NBA owner and you're trying to plan out this offseason for the Rockets, I think it's irresponsible to not view everything in this. We're trying to win a championship someday, whether that's today or later. That's the goal. So yeah, it's less fun to press fast forward maybe, but it's still the most responsible move.
Let's say James Harden doesn't go to the
Mhm.
Rockets. They still owe, it's top four protected, but they owe their 2024 pick to the OKC Thunder. They also owe their 2026 pick, that's also top four protected, to the OKC Thunder. And then I think OKC has the right to swap with them in 2025, correct? So it's their next three draft picks are essentially controlled by the Thunder. Knowing that, do you still expect them, like, again, no James Harden, do you still expect them to be ultra aggressive in getting better now, both on the free agency and trade markets?
They were talking about they've been talking about it pretty openly for the last month or two. Like they even talk about the
I
picks.
mean more like, I know they've been talking about it openly, but I mean more like they're not looking at the free agents who might fit their timeline where it's Chris Middleton, Fred VanVleet, like those are the guys that they will circle.
Well, here's the thing. Like, I was surprised that they were talking that Rafael would come out and be as open, like, hey, we don't own our own pick next year. We have every incentive to be good. Normally, GMs don't say that. You know, they say, hey, that pick is going to be a sunk cost, right? And we all know that's bullshit, but they say that, right? And if they're talking about it, you got to figure internally there's some real pressure, not only on Ime to turn this thing around, but Rafael, right? So I think there's some pressure there to build out the roster, and I think it's healthy pressure because I think they do need to really go all out. I think again, last year they went backwards. Like they should have, by not taking a step forward, they took a step backwards. They should have been a team that won like 30 games, right? This year they should be a team that's expected to make a jump into the playoffs. And instead they're a team that wants to get to 30 wins, which is strange, right? You should want to now get to that point where you're realistically a play-in team and trying to get to the next stage. And Tillman talked about it today at the press conference. He's like, hey, we're no longer at phase one, right? We're no longer trying to lose anymore and get top draft picks. Again, saying this all openly. I don't know if he's gonna get fined, but he said it. He said, like, we're no longer at that stage anymore. We're at stage 2. We're at trying to make the playoff stage. That's what he said. He said we're trying to make the playoffs. So it's like you don't try to make the playoffs by going out in the free agent market and trying not to get the best possible players. You know, you don't make trades like what the Rockets did formerly for Kevin Porter Jr., right? You're done making those trades, right? At this point, you're trying to make trades for guys like Mikal Bridges. You're trying to make signings for guys like Cam Johnson. You're trying to get top tier free agent meetings with guys like, it sucks to say this guy, Kyrie Irving. I just know it's eventually going to happen. There's going to be some report out there that the Rockets are interested in Kyrie Irving. Even though I disagree with it, that I don't think they should do it. I just know that they're very cold and calculating, and they're like stars. I feel like they're going to try and go after all the top guys. And I think it's going to be very, very, very fun. To be honest, like it's going to be very fun for me to read that stuff, even if I don't agree with some of the players that they're going after. It's still very exciting.
Are there any free agents other than James Harden that you like particularly well for this team? And look, I'll tell you a scenario that I had thought about, and I don't hate it. If they end up just splitting most of their cap space between, or all of it, between like Fred VanVleet and Draymond Green, just as either they're willing to play for the Rockets because maybe they're not getting $30 million a year from any other teams, including the Raptors. That would be the ultimate. I'd have questions maybe about some of the spacing with Green there, but that would be the ultimate. Like, let's bring in guys who aren't going to torpedo the development of the people we have in tow, but we're going to get measurably better immediately. Those are just two names that I view as legitimate flight risks that I would have circled for them.
Yeah, I don't want Draymond anywhere near my. I keep his fists away from my team, please. Like I don't want that. I don't want any of that.
He's just so transformative defensively and as a downhill passer, but
very strong player, very strong player. I'm one of those guys who's always questioned how much success he could find outside that Golden State Warriors ecosystem.
It's a
You may
great
be
fair
someone
question.
who disagrees with that. I've always felt like this is such a tailor-made team for him. I wonder if he doesn't have as much high-level shooting around him, if he doesn't have as much playmaking responsibility, if he still thrives in that same level. I think he'd still be a good player. I'm not sure. I'd question if he'd ever reach those Golden State heights ever again. Now, the Fred VanVleet thing, you and I have probably spent like an hour combined podcasting time talking about trying to get Fred VanVleet on the Rockets. Like it's such a perfect fit. It's such a no-brainer. Like if you can't get Harden, you have to go after someone like that because he's good defensively, so he can make up for what Jalen Green isn't. He is advanced beyond what the Rockets are at a point from playmaking. He's not James Harden. Like don't get me wrong, but he is better than Jalen Green as a passer. He's conceivably better than everybody on the roster right now. And he also like allows you to still do the Sengun stuff, right? Like he's not going to take away from like if you want next year, if you want to do, let's give Alperen Sengun like 15 touches a game in the post, right? You can still do that. Like James Harden comes in, you're not going to do that. Chances are James Harden comes in, you're trading Alperen Sengun, right? Because it doesn't make sense defensively or offensively anymore. But I think if you bring in someone like Fred VanVleet, who can just be a complimentary guard, you can still do that kind of stuff. And Jalen gets to reach, Jalen gets to reach those high levels. And you can, at that point, I wouldn't go after Draymond. I would try to trade someone into my remaining cap space, right? Or trade someone into the remaining cap space / put together contracts, whatever. Like I would try and make a trade for the next star, right? But let's be clear: if you're not getting James Harden, you have to try and go big fish hunting in some way, shape, or form. You just do, because you're not going to get an opportunity again to do this because Jalen's extension comes up, and after Jalen's extension comes up, you got the extensions of potentially Alperen Sengun, potentially KJ Martin's going to get a big deal this summer. So like you have to be very delicate about making these decisions about how they line up.
They should have one more year of this because the Jalen Green extension, who will be like the first wave of guys to get paid, that'll kick in 25, 26. And so they have another summer if they want to holster it. But the idea is if you can do it, and we're looking at their draft pick situation, you do it immediately. It's just the free agency class isn't that. We just named all the best. The only other name I could throw out, because I don't like the Kyrie signing either. You could convince me it could happen just because I feel like anything's on the table for the Rockets this summer, and I don't mean that as an insult. But the only other name that could remotely be intriguing, and I just don't know if you go after him before you have the guy in place, would be Chris Middleton, who's also very scalable. Yeah. But he's about to turn 32, and he's looked rough at times during these playoffs, and especially defensively when he's been healthy. And that does lead me to my next question, though, because you mentioned trades. We talked loosely about, does Jaylen Brown become a main fixture of the Rockets discussions because of his really good relationship with Ime Udoka? And he probably won't make All-NBA, I don't think. So he won't be Supermax eligible, but that might not stop the Celtics and him from trying to confront their future this offseason ahead of his free agency in 2024.
And by the way, we should mention that if you're a Rockets fan, you should root for him not to make All-NBA, right? Because then you're offering the same per year capital as the Celtics are offering.
What's interesting there is like if he does make All-NBA, though, at least you get the clean, okay, if he accepts his extension, that's it, it's over with. But if he says no, then it's DEFCON 1 and that you need to get in there. But I get what you're saying, where if you want to keep the possibility open and not have it totally shut, that you don't want him to make All-NBA. I ultimately don't think he will. But what is the level of player? Because now if James Harden is coming, you can say, all right, yeah, go get a Mikal Bridges. And it just be like an afterthought because you're not looking at him as your lifeline. But if you don't get James Harden, what is the level? Are you willing to? I think Jaylen Brown, yes, I guess I would say, I don't know, but like, are you still willing to give up the assets it will take to get a Jaylen Brown or a Mikal Bridges? Or does it need to be like this even higher end player than that? Because again, I think the decision gets more complicated if James Harden, or even if Fred VanVleet isn't coming in free agency, because then you're kind of looking at this as your crowning acquisition of the summer. And with what you already have in place, maybe you believe that Jaylen Brown and Mikal Bridges can be sort of this, guiding North Star for the future. But I don't think any of those guys profile as I don't want to
lift the sails up. Right. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My answer to this question is going to be a little annoying to you. Where are they landing in the lottery in this situation? Right. Because if you get Victor, yeah, James Harden doesn't need to come.
Right.
Right. Because Victor might be that guy.
It's
right?
that's why on some level it's so fucking stupid to have this conversation before the draft lottery. But look, I can't pump out stuff on all 30 teams right out of the draft.
Yeah. This is why I hate that the NBA lottery exists. No other I think the NHL does this, and no other real like professional sports league in America does this, right? It's like it's them and the NHL. Like every other league does reverse order, and for some reason the NBA is so sensitive to comments about tanking that they're going to be like, "Oh, we have to like appease these talking heads by saying, "Hey, look, there's not that much incentive to tank because we have a lottery system, and these other leagues have a reverse order system, and it's so dumb, but teams still tank every year, and people still get mad about it. So the NBA should stop trying to appease these people. Like, stop. Like, people are going to tank. It's always going to be a viable strategy, but whatever. Yeah.
I would agree. I wish they would do it earlier. Like, we know the lottery, like which the lottery teams are when you're doing the coin flips to break the ties. Like, why do we have to do it in the middle of the second round of the playoffs or the conference finals or whatever it ends up being is what I'm not a fan of.
Well, because you know why, right? Because it's like you're doing it in the middle of like a conference finals game, and that lottery is going to get really juiced up ratings, right?
And also at that point, there are so few teams playing that you're trying to appeal to. I do understand why they do it. I just wish they didn't do it that way.
Yeah.
So if they don't have Wemby, are you still going the route of, if they don't have Wemby or Harden, are you still going the route of, yeah, we would trade for Mikal Bridges, or we should go after Jaylen Brown if they become available? Are you of the mind, how urgent is if Damian Lillard becomes available? Is that a name that you have circled if you don't have James Harden, because he does bring a lot of what you need, but he's also another guy where it's okay, like what else is, we need to have other pieces in place with him. So like, you don't have Wemby, you don't have Harden. How do you proceed if you're this team?
I don't know how you've always felt about Dame, but I've always felt like Dame is not the guy you build everything around, because he doesn't. I think, in my opinion, you need 2 of 3 qualities, right, to be like a build everything around you type of player, right? You need 2 of these 3. You need to be a supernova scorer, which Dame is, right? You need to be like an elite passer, which Dame isn't, and you need to be an elite defender, right? So 2 of those 3 qualities, you have a superstar that you can build a franchise around, right? And Dame does not possess some of the skill that you need. You need playmaking, and he doesn't have that. You need defense next to Jalen Green if you're not going to get the playmaking. He doesn't have that. So I think going after him is a little counterintuitive, but the Rockets might still do it because God knows what they're going to do this summer. But some of the other targets around the league, I would look at, like, I mentioned the Clippers. I mean, Kawhi just tore his meniscus, so that's kind of been blown up. I think that's actually more likely now that they're going to blow it up, since that's happened. But Paul George might be a name. Pascal Siakam might be a name. We talked about this yesterday.
Siakam is someone, not so much Paul George, maybe because he's too close to free agency. Siakam is someone I could see they don't get anyone else, but they still go after Siakam. That feels like someone who would make a large enough difference.
Yeah, and he's certainly good enough to make a difference. The one guy, and I hope he doesn't demand a trade, and I hope he doesn't leave, that I've kind of been circling as someone that could eventually grow disgruntled. And this might surprise you because it's so early and he's so young. I hope Trae Young doesn't grow disgruntled. I hope he doesn't, because I mean the Hawks basically had to fire their coach and replace him immediately mid-season to appease him, which is never a good sign, right? Because usually you put in the interim guy and then you do the coaching search in the offseason. But the fact that they felt pressure to go after the guy right away kind of indicates that, oh, like there's some real Trae's kind of breathing down their neck a little bit about building a winner around him. That's a guy I think is worth pursuing. I'm not sure if Houston has the goods to get it done, but I would take a strong look around the league at some of these young players and take gambles Chances are you're not going to get them, but take gambles, right? Anthony Davis is actually a guy that I think could become available if the Lakers didn't owe all their freaking draft picks, right, in the coming future. And that's the issue, right? So some of these teams just need to stay good so they can't tear it down, right? So they need these draft picks. So like I don't know, I would take a hard look around the league. I would try my best to go after these guys that I mentioned. I would try to go for Pascal, try to go for AD, try to go for Trey, even though I don't think he's going to become available anytime soon, but it's possible that he becomes available sooner than people think. I would try to go for like all these like Carl Towns. I would even try to go after I would try to go after all these guys. And I would settle for like the Mikal Bridges. I would settle for like the Cam Johnson. But like bottom line, you have to spend the money. You have to spend the money, in my opinion. And if you're not going to get the star this summer, spend the money prudently. Don't spend too much of the money on one player, because the hope is that you're spending the money somewhere that you can trade again to go after the star later.
And that was going to be my final question for you. What should the contingency look like with this team? Because look, I think free agency, if it's not going to be James Harden or Fred VanVleet, I just feel like it's unlikely that they make there's also not a ton of huge names out there. And so then you're very reliant on what's happening in the trade market. And in some regard, even when teams are giving up really good players, yeah, the fact that Houston can have all that cap space to make it easier is great. But like, you're normally still sending contracts out anyway. You're going to need to spend a huge chunk of your money in free agency, especially now. I don't want to use the word punitive, but how different the salary cap floor rules are in the new CBA. Does the contingency look at, well, we're just going to try, and maybe they're on inflated deals, but we want to bring in like high character guys who make us better immediately, where it's like, Josh Hart has his player options. You try to overpay him to come out of New York. Nas Reed, getting him out of Minnesota would be a great fit.
Don't do this. Like they can't do this. I recognize they're not exactly
even on short-term deals, though, is my point. A lot of these guys are going to want to get back in the market, I think, soon. Okay. And so if you're looking at 2-year deals, that's what I'm talking about with contingencies, because you're talking about you need to spend the money somewhere. If you can't get one of the most coveted restricted free agents, if you can't get one of the bigger names that are out there, do you look at signing these inflated shorter term deals with high character and higher quality veterans, or even taking a swing on someone like an Ayo Dosunmu, who's going to be, coming out of or an Austin Reeves? Like, if you can inflate his deal enough on the back end to make the Lakers be twitchy about it. Or if it comes to a point where, hey, we're not going to get any of just like the biggest names in free agency or even on the trade market, we're giving out all 1-year placeholder contracts. That's that. And we'll move forward.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Like, this is strictly contingency, and this is strictly like short-term deals. But these overpays, they get you to a point where you're like the Blazers, right? You're just middling. You're at risk of becoming a middling team, and you don't want to do that, right? You want to keep your upside as high as you possibly can, and that's why you spend prudently. And that's why you sign contracts that can be moved later on. That's why you sign contracts that you don't need to attach stuff to move, right? Like, I think that's kind of why I think you go, if you don't get the free agents, go trade, go on the trade market. If you don't get the trade, if you're not lucky in the trade market, I would try and keep some powder dry. And what I mean by keeping powder dry, I mean cap flexibility in the way of contracts. And like Middleton's a great guy to go after, but I don't even view him as a contingency plan. I just think he's a really very strong player that I think would be a decent use of resources.
No, yeah, I'm talking non-stars for sure.
Like Josh Hart, yeah.
I don't know where I land on that, but if they're not willing, because I assume they're not willing to, and this market has been pretty cold, Arctic cold for a while, but like the way of, well, then we'll take back some unwanted money from teams if they're going to attach other prospects or equities. Because if you swing and miss this summer, I think what's tough on both the trade and free agency markets is you don't know what's going to develop leading into the deadline. And so that's why you might want to have those placeholder deals, or even, again, I think players who are still good, but maybe they're on those 2-year contracts. It was what the Knicks effectively did. I think they signed a bunch of the wrong players, but it's what they did in anticipation of the Donovan Mitchell move. They just ultimately weren't willing to pony up the price tag. I think that's the route you ultimately have to go. It's not, let's just pivot into and look, I would be, if I'm not getting Harden or if I'm not trading for a star, I'm not signing Chris Middleton, quite frankly. I'm honestly not giving up the equity for a Jaylen Brown or Mikal Bridges, probably, unless I know I have another guy that I'm acquiring, or that if I sign Van Fleet, it's different when you're looking at Jaylen Brown or Mikal Bridges. And so I think that they're going to end up trying to straddle a very fine line. And I'm interested to just see, I'm not saying they can't do it. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just interested to see what the end result is.
Yeah, this conversation makes me very nervous. But we need to have it, because there's a possibility that none of these things happen for them. There's a possibility they get the 5th pick in the draft. There's a possibility they get instead of James Harden, they end up with nobody, right? Like they end up with none of the big names, right? And in that situation, you kind of have to pivot very quickly, because if you don't pivot quickly, you lose optionality. And I don't know. Are those trades still available? You think trades like, offshooting people in the cap space, are those moves still available? Because I look at these teams, I'm like, who still has picks to do that anymore? These teams trade picks like candy now.
Well, that was my point as to why that market has been fairly cold. I'm just thinking, if it's a team that maybe in theory wants to, you're talking small time things where maybe it's the Magic. They don't want to pay the partial guarantee on Jonathan Isaac's deal, but they're trying to get rid of him and they'll give you something to take him. Or maybe they want to maximize their cap space, but they're not trying to get rid of certain guys, where it's, are you willing to take on, this isn't even a bad deal. It's just, are you willing to take on a Gary Harris? Or if the Knicks, maybe they need a third party as part of another trade they're making, are you willing to take back Evan Fournier on his expiring deal for some kind of compensation? I think those types of moves might still exist, but it's not, we're past the point of, 5-6 years ago where it's, hey, we'll give you this first round pick. You need to take back this bad contract. We're leasing out your cap space, essentially. One, because so many of the teams that would spend in free agency are just so far away over the cap anyway. And two, we just went through it with the names, like the level of talent moving around. Like, think about Jalen Brunson was the best player to just leave in free agency in how long? A couple of years at least. I'm trying to think of who was it since Kawhi in 2019? When did LeBron go to LA?
LeBron went to LA in 2019. Yeah, 2018.
Yeah, so was it since Kawhi left Toronto for just outright left? I guess because that was the same Kyrie and KD in Brooklyn that happened before that as well.
Yeah. Everything's been going through trades. Like Drew Holiday got traded to the Bucks via trade. I think I'm thinking off the top of my head, like maybe DeMar DeRozan. I don't know. I guess if you want to count those Bulls guys that switch teams, I don't know. It's very during the pandemic, these top end players got really nervous for some reason and signed these multi-year extensions, right? Or I'm talking during 2020, 2021, they all signed extensions. And as a Rockets fan looking at that, I was getting very nervous. It's like, what if the Rockets have to pivot to a rebuild soon? None of these guys are going to become available. They're all going to be the Rockets are going to be stuck with a pretty crappy free agent class. And lo and behold, here we are in 2023, and we're stuck with a pretty bad free agent class because all these guys signed extensions. So yeah, I mean, it's been a minute since we've had a big start and changed teams. But I guess that's kind of what Harden's supposed to be, right? That's kind of what the theory of Harden is. I don't know. I just, Draymond is someone I view as like a contingency in that way, right? I am not someone who would be enthusiastic about even doing that, because I think even that would be a hard contract to move. So you can do stuff like that. I would tend to avoid it and try and keep those books as clean as you possibly can. So I would even let the space. I'd be willing to let the space not be taken up, not be absorbed. As
you should look, because there's always 2024. They'll still have Jalen Green will be on the final year of his rookie scale, and so you're not. You still have all these other the most expensive player on your roster as of right now in 24-25 is Kevin Porter Jr. and his salary is partially guaranteed. I think it's $6 million, and that's, or is it $1 million? I can't remember what his deal is. Just the way it's structured is so weird that you still have another summer to get a bite at the apple at this. I don't know the way the new CBA set up with cap smoothing and some of the penalties that are out there. I feel like they've effectively killed free agency a little bit, but you still do have another summer to try and go big game hunting. And so I would be with you where you preserve the powder, but you're also, again, your pick is owed to Oklahoma City. And so I think there will be some urgency to materially improve this roster no matter what, especially after spending 3 straight seasons at the bottom of the Western Conference.
Do you think that the Rockets are like scheming behind the scenes, not just like planning, but like legitimately like do you think if they're in contact with Harden through a third party or whatever, do you think they're trying to get Harden to like talk to some of these other players? Like, hey,
yeah, first of all, Harden's going to want to talk to these other players because if he just comes back to Houston, I don't mean this as an insult to their young core. He's 34. He doesn't care about Jalen Green or Jabari Smith Jr. or Sengun or whoever they're drafting. You're absolutely talking to, look, he might be able to talk to Jaylen Brown in the next series when Philly plays Boston, probably. So like, you're absolutely talking to these players. And I will say if they can land somebody, like if it's Harden or if it's Van Fleet, it does make the steps of their process. So like one of the, like it's, even if you get, once you know where you are in the lottery, it helps out a ton as well. But if you know you're going to end up with Scoot, Brandon Miller, or Wemby, that informs so much of what you should be doing. And we're working with a lack of clarity on that respect. But even after the draft lottery, there's so many questions and so many different scenarios that could play out. We're waiting not only for the lottery, I think it matters how the playoffs end. That will determine, I think, not only some part of James Harden's future, but what's going on with Jaylen Brown. Maybe what's going on with Trae Young. That's somebody you mentioned. Maybe even what's going on in Golden State with not only Draymond Green, but like Klay Thompson's talking about getting a max deal moving forward. So
Rockets fans have thrown his name around, and I'm like, I don't know. This is the one team where I'm like, I think they're actually going to try and keep these guys together until they retire. Right? I think they're actually going to try and do that. Except for maybe Draymond. Draymond, he might have punched his way out of that dream, but like everybody else, I feel like might still be there until it's time to wrap it up. It's interesting. Like you really do have to monitor this stuff, and some of the stuff's going to develop faster than we think it's developing, but it's actually going on behind the scenes, right? It's when the player picks the new team. It's like the story comes out from his market. It's like this has been going on for a while.
Funny how that works.
Yeah.
And the final thing I'll say before they go is if the Rockets end up not doing anything super splashy, it'll look bad if they convey this incredible pick to OKC. They're not in this barren position. We've talked a lot about free agency and trades. They have a baseline here. They have going to be another top lottery pick in this year. If you fall to 5 or whatever it is, that's borderline disastrous. But they're not working with a blank slate of talent. They're working with a very flexible financial slate. And now, while there was a lack of progress, I think on a collective level this year, you've made the move at head coach. It's like you have at least, you're not working with nothing is my point. And so I think a lot of pomp and circumstance
attractive to some of these players, you think?
I think taxes make them attractive, like being in that market. And I think Houston's always been a market that's been involved.
Not Houston. I'm talking about Ime Udoka, the coach. Is he someone that can pull in a free agent?
I think and I actually think you mentioned this on your podcast. I think that coaches are overrated when it comes to free agent draws, but he does seem to have a very good relationship with all the Celtics players. It's like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. So not those guys specifically, but yeah, I think if you look at it and maybe you see if you're on the fence and you're like, well, I don't want to just take the money from Houston, but you have confidence that they'll go out and get another guy. They have a good coach. They have plenty of other trade assets. I think it helps. I think he helps more than, I don't know if Nick Nurse would have been a draw.
I feel you.
To players.
Yeah. I felt the same exact way. Like it feels like they picked the guy who can most help accomplish that goal, but that doesn't mean that he's going to help accomplish that goal because it's very hard for coaches to actually do that, right? It's like it's really gonna like this is part of why this year was like you mentioned it was a lack of progress. It was also like a wasted opportunity for yourself to become more attractive to these free agents, right? If you had won more games and if some of these guys looked even better than they looked this year, it's like, oh, what they got going down there in Houston, right? It's like some of these players might like want to go play with these guys, but because they showed so little this year, it's like there's a bunch of negative stories in the press about them.
Is there anything else that you think we need to discuss before I let you go? Roughly 45 minutes later or 35 minutes later than I wanted to keep you.
No, I guess I can plug my Substack. RedNationHoops.com is a Substack. It's a podcast. It's going to be free all summer. If you're a Rockets fan and you listen to this podcast, be sure to follow me there. Social media at SomalNBA. I mean, I don't have much to say until the lottery. The lottery is really going to be what changes everything. Yeah,
or do the Sixers get eliminated before then? Might be the moment that changes everything.
Yeah, and I don't know if we talked about this yesterday. I don't know which way that cuts. Like,
Yeah.
do the Sixers need to be successful for Harden to want to leave, or the opposite, right? I don't know. Like, I feel like externally there's more pressure on Harden to stay if they don't win, right? Whereas internally he may want to leave, but everybody's going to look at the guy like, really, man, you're going to leave again? Like, whereas if he wins a title, the story is easier to sell. Like, okay, he got the job done in Philly. Now he wants to go home. It's easier to forgive him for leaving a title contender.
It would be really funny. He leaves for Houston. Joel Embiid requests a trade, and then Houston just sitting there with all that assets to maybe run it back with those two. If Harden's just happier in Houston, I see what you're saying, and I think I agree. But also, if they win, I think Philly might be more inclined to give him just whatever he wants in free agency, because then it's okay. Even if it doesn't pan out, we won a title with this group, so that would be an obstacle the Rockets can't overcome. But I can't stress enough how serious and significant the ties Harden has to Houston are. And I think that's just an element that, even regardless of what happens with the Sixers, that probably isn't being talked about enough. All of it's about, well, let's see how the Sixers season ends or what they offer him in free agency. I think there's just a real pull to the Houston market and community and franchise itself that, even despite all this noise, is still being severely underweighted.
I still see Harden shirts every day. Every day. I see people wearing Harden shirts. I see people... there's artwork of Harden around the city. The guy owned the city. Like, he really did. Like, he was like a larger than life figure. And it helped, actually, that he was so hated around the rest of the league, because they came around him like in a very similar way to like how Oklahoma City fans like came around Russ, right? Like when he was such a polarizing player, that kind of stuff, like defending a guy for 8 or 9 years, it really does build a bond that is hard to describe. And when you see Rockets fans the way that they are, people always complain about them, and it really stems from that relationship that they have had with this guy for a decade, right? And it's hard to explain unless you're here, really. I mean, and I think you understand it because we talk about it all the time. But like, I think it's something that people shouldn't have been surprised when that thing came out on Christmas. They shouldn't have. We were talking about it because we thought it was a possibility. Harden even hinted there was a possibility in his press release to Houston, right? Like he wrote an ad out in the Chronicle, and he hinted that, hey, I might want to come down and come back here one day, right? And like, he didn't say it like that, but it was, might as well have said it like that. Like this kind of stuff. I don't know. Like his ties to the city are real. I think it's going to be very, very interesting if he does return. I personally am rooting for it, not only on a story level as a fan, because I told you I'm a Rockets fan through and through again. Feels great. It feels great to look at this team like that again. It feels great to kind of root for an exciting summer. I'm gonna look through all these rumors like a pig in slop. Like I'm gonna be all over it. Like I really am very, very excited for what's gonna happen this summer.
Solomon, this was great as always. Thank you so much for coming on and being so generous with your time. As you know by now, I'll be pestering you again in the future. But thank you so much for now.
Yeah, for sure. I'll talk to you down the line, Dan.